class. I'm so excited you could all be here on this dreary afternoon. I know it's hard getting here in the rain, but I'm glad everyone showed up. Today's lesson is titled Fashion Revolution, the 1960s. We're going to be discussing the fashion influences, the social influences, and just pretty much a brief summary of what happened in the 1960s. The full PowerPoint is available online, so if you want to follow along with the photos, you can find that online. But just for now, take notes because there is going to be both an assignment and an evaluation at the end of the lesson. Our objective today is given information regarding historical events of the 1960s. The student will analyze information from the presentation to draw conclusions about how pivotal events influence the modern-day fashion industry. Does everyone understand the objective?
Yes.
Awesome. Has anyone studied the 1960s before?
No.
No? Well, that's great because we're going to have a really good overview today. We're going to go pretty in-depth with it, so I'm really excited. And fashion history is really important to learn about because it gives us insight into today's fashion trends by looking at what happened before. I'm sure you've all noticed, the hippie bohemian trends coming back, and that's all reminiscent of the 1960s, so we're going to talk about that today. Let's dive right in and review the major events of the 1960s. In 1960, the FDA approved birth control, which kind of reignited the feminist movement, and women began responding through fashion to the newfound freedom that they had. Also in 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected president, which ushered Jackie O into the White House, and we had a new style icon for the country. I'm sure everyone has heard of Jackie O. In 1961, the Berlin Wall was erected. Freedom rides began, and the Russians put the first man into space. An American, Alan Shepard, also made the first suborbital flight. In the 1960s, space travel was really important to fashion, so make a special note of those events. In 1962, there was a pop art symposium at the Modern Museum of Art in New York City. John Glenn, another American, orbited the Earth, and The Silent Spring by Rachel Caron is published. The Silent Spring was a feminist work about how college-educated women were frustrated at having to take on the role of housewives and not being able to have careers outside of the home. So that also kind of fueled the feminist movement in the United States. Let's continue to 1963. There was a civil rights rally in D.C. John F. Kennedy sadly was assassinated, and another feminist work, The Feminine Mystique, was published. And the Beatles released their record, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Now, has everyone heard of that record?
Yes.
Awesome. It's one of my favorites because I am secretly a hippie. Okay. In 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Bill, and Martin Luther King won the Nobel Peace Prize. So 1964 was a really big year for civil rights in the United States. And then in 65, mod ready-to-wear hit the U.S. market, mostly in response to Beatlemania and... bless you, and the Beatles coming to the United States. In 1966, the National Organization for Women was founded, again in response to the feminist movement started in 1960. And in 1967, the BN in Central Park, about 10,000 young people, mostly hippies, gathered in Central Park to just kind of sit in protest of the Vietnam War. In 1968, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated, and Richard Nixon became president, which greatly changed, I'm sure all of you know, the political atmosphere in the United States. And in 1969, I'm sure everyone's heard of Woodstock. Woodstock happened in 1969, and Apollo 2 lands on the moon. So major themes from that timeline, feminist movement, space travel, Woodstock, and definitely the changing political waves in the United States. Okay, now let's continue our discussion of the 1960s by exploring the lifestyle influences of the decade. Okay, so music was a really big deal in the 1960s. We talked about Woodstock in 1969 was a place for hippies to live communally, experience art and craft shows, music, free love, and getting stoned. Some of the major musical people that showed up were Janis Joplin, CCR, Jimi Hendrix, and Sly and the Family Stone. On the other spectrum of music was the Beatles. Beatlemania brought mod style from Carnaby Street to the United States. And later, the Beatles kind of became famous for their hippie style, their long hair, and I'm sure if any of you have heard the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, we all know that it means LSD, so they kind of dove headfirst into that hippie lifestyle. Here I have a photo for you of some young ladies experiencing Beatlemania. Does this remind anybody of a modern-day Justin Bieber concert?
I love Bieber.
I love Bieber too, and his hair.
I got his fever.
As far as movies go, they were also really influential, and two movie stars stood out in the 1960s. Audrey Hepburn, I have another picture of her here for you. She appeared in Breakfast at Tiffany's as Chanel wearing socialite Holly Golightly. She made the bouffant hairstyle, the turban, little black dress, all very popular, and she was very loyal to designer Givenchy. And Michael Kors is quoted as saying, "Today women take for granted the things that they wear, but if it hadn't been for Audrey Hepburn, they wouldn't be wearing them." So you can see what a big style icon she was in the 60s, and her influence still extends to today. Another movie star kind of on the opposite spectrum of Audrey Hepburn, where Audrey Hepburn was ladylike and classy, Brigitte Bardot, pictured here in Cannes in one of the first bikinis seen on a public figure. She personified the innocent sex kitten look. She was famous for her bikini, her Cherose hairstyle. She's very loyal to Mary Quant and her miniskirts. She was famous for her striped sailors t-shirts, her bright red flats, and she was in movies such as A Very Private Affair, Viva Maria, 2 Weeks in September, and Les Femmes. So she was a very big French star in the 60s and greatly influenced fashion. Okay, moving on to some art movements of the 60s. Op art and pop art became extremely popular in the 1960s. Pop art glorified everyday objects, while op art tricked the eye with bright optical illusions. And op art was often translated into fabric, and so it was a large influence in fashion. I have here for you a piece of op art by Mondrian. It's translated into one of the most famous dresses of the era, the Mondrian dress by Yves Saint Laurent. So as you can see, that was extremely important. Here, before we continue on to Style Tribes, we're going to take a brief break. So get your notes together, run to the snack machine, and when we get back, we're going to continue talking about the 60s.